My lifelong best friend ambushed me in the parking lot at dawn, hysterically crying that my fiancé had been sending her coded messages, and by noon I realized she had been orchestrating this exact confrontation since last winter. The air that morning was freezing, the kind of damp Pacific Northwest cold that settles directly into your joints. I was walking toward my car for an early shift at the clinic, clutching a lukewarm travel mug of coffee. The lot was entirely empty except for my Subaru and the dumpsters near the exit. When Sienna stepped out from behind the concrete pillar, I actually dropped my keys. Her face was a mess. Her mascara was running down her cheeks in thick, dark tracks, and she was breathing like she had just sprinted a mile. She grabbed my forearms, her nails digging into my winter coat, and started sobbing. She told me she couldn't keep the secret anymore. She told me Ethan was torturing her with his silence. She pulled out her phone, aggressively tapping at the screen with shaking fingers, pulling up a string of completely ordinary text messages from a group chat we shared, begging me to look at the timestamps. Sienna and I grew up attached at the hip in Portland. When her parents' marriage dissolved into a bitter, screaming mess during our sophomore year, she basically lived in my basement for 3 years. We survived high school drama, terrible college internships that paid us in expired lunch vouchers, and our endlessly messy 20s. I knew her better than I knew my own sister. Then Ethan came into the picture. He is a software architect. He's highly analytical, heavily reliant on routine, super literal, and honestly pretty socially reserved. Small talk genuinely pains him. When I first introduced them, Sienna was supportive. She joked that I had found my perfect opposite, someone to ground me when I was spinning out. But last November, her behavior mutated into something bizarre. It started small. She began analyzing his completely mundane text replies in our 3-person group chat. I'd suggest a restaurant for dinner. Ethan would reply, "Sounds fine." And Sienna would immediately text me privately. She claimed his use of periods instead of emojis was a subconscious tell. She said it was a sign he was suppressing deep, chaotic romantic feelings for her, and was overcompensating by acting cold. I laughed it off. I told her Ethan types like a robot to literally everyone he meets. He sends his own mother birthday texts that read like corporate memos. Then came a Tuesday, at 6:45 a.m. I walked into my kitchen, turning on the overhead lights, and stopped dead. Sitting dead center on our granite kitchen island was an antique, tarnished silver pocket watch. It wasn't ours. Next to it was a handwritten note on Sienna's custom ivory stationery. The ink was thick, pressed hard into the paper. It read, "I accept your proposal. I'm ready." My stomach bottomed out. I called her immediately. She answered on the first ring, completely breathless, the background noise totally silent like she had been sitting by the phone waiting. She claimed Ethan had slipped the watch into her wool coat pocket during our group trivia night at O'Blarney's pub the previous Friday. She spoke in this hushed, reverent tone, telling me she knew he couldn't hide his burning passion anymore, that the watch was a symbol of the time they had lost and the future they were going to build. I left the watch on the counter and marched into the bedroom. I woke Ethan up and showed it to him. He blinked the sleep out of his eyes, put on his glasses, and stared at the watch like it was radioactive. He had never seen it before in his life. He wasn't defensive or angry at first. He was just entirely baffled. And then, as I explained Sienna's theory, genuinely disturbed. He didn't even sit near her at O'Blarney's. I called Sienna back and demanded to know why she thought Ethan was secretly in love with her. I didn't yell. I kept my voice perfectly flat, which only seemed to agitate her more. She started listing her evidence in a rapid, frantic cadence. She told me Ethan wore a blue tie to work every Thursday specifically because he knew it was her favorite color. He didn't even own a blue tie. She said he left his porch light on at night specifically to guide her home. It was on a digital timer. I thought she was having a massive, terrifying mental breakdown. I wanted to help her. I thought about calling her mother or taking her to the hospital. But then I sat down at my laptop and logged into our Ring camera security dashboard. I don't know what made me do it, just a sudden, creeping paranoia. I spent 4 grueling hours scrolling backward through the video footage. My coffee went completely cold on the desk. Every single weekday for the last 90 days, Sienna's white Honda Civic had been parked across the street from our driveway. She would pull up in the dark, kill the headlights, and idle by the storm drain. At precisely 7:15 a.m., she would watch Ethan pull his car out of the garage. Once his taillights disappeared down the street, she would wait exactly 3 minutes, start her engine, and drive away. She had been stalking our house, sitting out there in the freezing rain, while I was inside drinking my morning coffee just 50 feet away. Things imploded entirely 2 weeks later. Ethan is an amateur landscape photographer, and after years of keeping his work private, he finally secured his very first showcase at a small indie gallery in downtown Seattle. He was incredibly nervous. We invited 50 people to celebrate. The gallery owner, a quiet guy named Jasper, had set up a beautiful spread of wine and cheese. Right as Jasper was tapping his glass to give his opening toast, the heavy double doors at the front of the gallery swung open. Sienna marched in. She was wearing a stunning, full-length white bridal-style gown. It had lace sleeves and a sweeping train that dragged over the polished hardwood floors. The entire room went dead silent. You could hear the rustle of the fabric. She walked directly past the crowd, straight to the center wall where Ethan's premier landscape piece was hanging. She reached into a canvas tote bag slung over her shoulder, pulled out a heavy steel hammer, and drove a 3-inch nail right through the expensive gallery drywall, completely ignoring Jasper's panicked shout. She hung up a blown-up 8x10 candid photograph of Ethan sleeping on our living room couch. It was a deeply creepy, grainy photo she must have taken years ago, through the front window, without us ever knowing. She turned to the crowded room, her eyes wide and glassy. She reached out, grabbed a glass of champagne from a frozen waiter, and announced a toast to their undeniable, cosmic partnership. Ethan physically stepped behind Jasper, completely mortified. He looked like he wanted the floor to swallow him whole. When Jasper demanded she take the photo down and leave immediately, Immediately, Sienna didn't even blink. She just opened her fingers and purposely dropped her champagne glass. It shattered violently against the floor, glass shards scattering across the hardwood. She pointed a shaking finger directly at me. She screamed that I was trapping Ethan in a loveless prison, holding his creative soul hostage just to pay my rent. She yelled that she was the only one who truly saw his genius. She refused to move, planting her feet in the center of the gallery, demanding that Ethan kiss her in front of the crowd to break the spell I had over him. We had to have the venue's private security guard, a burly guy named Arlo, physically drag her out to the sidewalk. She kicked the doorframe on the way out. She thrashed against him, sobbing and screaming Ethan's name until the doors finally clicked shut. I didn't sleep that night. I sat at the kitchen table in the dark, watching the street. I called a civil litigator the next morning. I dropped a $5,000 retainer without a second thought to start building a relentless harassment case. Our lawyer, Graham, was a pragmatic, unsmiling man in his 50s. He sat across from us in his sterile office and told us these obsessive fixations are incredibly dangerous. Not because of malice, but because the person completely reconstructs reality to fit their delusion. To Sienna, she was the protagonist in a tragic romance. I was just the villain standing in her way. Graham told us to lock down our social media, our bank accounts, our schedules, everything. It was a good thing we did. Because 3 days later, Sienna tried to hijack Ethan's entire life. She called Delta Airlines pretending to be his executive assistant. She actually used a voice-altering app to deepen her tone and attempted to cancel his upcoming flight to a major tech summit in Austin. When the agent asked for his account PIN, she guessed his birth year and failed. Undeterred, she tried to use his accumulated miles to book a non-refundable $3,200 couples retreat in Sedona under her name and his. The airline flagged the transaction entirely because she failed the secondary security questions, but the notification still popped up on Ethan's phone while we were eating dinner. It made me physically nauseous to realize she knew his frequent flyer number. We finally cornered her at a formal civil injunction hearing at the King County Courthouse. The air in the courtroom was stifling, smelling faintly of floor wax and old paper. Ethan sat next to me, his jaw clenched so tight I thought his teeth might crack. Graham sat on my left, calmly organizing his legal pads. Then Sienna walked in. She didn't look crazy. She didn't look like the woman screaming in the bridal gown. She was wearing a sharp, tailored navy suit, her hair pulled back into a neat bun. She sat at the respondent's table and folded her hands calmly. She didn't even look at us. When the judge asked her to respond to the allegations of stalking and harassment, Sienna stood up. Her voice was steady, utterly devoid of the hysteria she had displayed in the parking lot. She told the judge she understood how it looked, but that she had brought a witness to corroborate that a secret, intimate relationship had been entirely mutual and initiated by Ethan. The heavy wooden doors at the back of the courtroom opened. My stomach dropped to the floor. Walking down the aisle was Coralie. She was a mutual friend from our college days, someone I hadn't spoken to in over a year because she had moved to Portland for a residency. I had introduced Coralie and Sienna years ago. Coralie took the stand. She refused to make eye contact with me. She placed her hand on the Bible, swore to tell the truth, and then looked directly at the judge. She testified in a clear, unwavering voice that on New Year's Eve 3 years ago, she had walked into the guest bedroom during a party at my apartment. She claimed she saw Ethan cornering Sienna against the wall, forcefully kissing her, and begging her to wait for him until he could figure out a way to break off our engagement without losing his savings. Graham leaned over to me, his pen hovering over his notepad. "Did this happen?" he whispered sharply. I looked at Ethan. All the color had drained from his face. He was staring at Coralie in absolute horror. "She wasn't even in the state that New Year's," Ethan whispered back, his voice trembling with a mix of rage and panic. "She was in Oregon. I have the photos." But Coralie wasn't finished. She pulled a printed screenshot out of her purse. She handed it to the bailiff, who handed it to the judge. Coralie claimed it was a text message Ethan had sent her the morning after the supposed kiss, begging her to keep it a secret. The judge adjusted his glasses, reading the paper in silence, while Sienna finally turned her head and looked right at me, a tiny, satisfied smile playing at the corners of her mouth. The judge placed the paper flat on his heavy oak desk. He pressed his fingertips together, studying it in complete silence for what felt like 10 minutes, but was probably only 30 seconds. The only sound in the room was the low hum of the HVAC unit. "Mr. Locke," the judge said, looking over the rim of his reading glasses at our lawyer Graham, "were you provided a copy of this exhibit prior to today's hearing?" Graham stood up, buttoning his suit jacket with a completely unbothered expression. "I was not, Your Honor. The respondent did not submit this during discovery. We request a 10-minute recess to review this document." The judge granted it. The bailiff handed Graham a photocopy of the screenshot, and he ushered Ethan and me out into the fluorescent-lit hallway of the courthouse. Ethan was shaking, actually vibrating with panic. He leaned against the cold marble wall and dragged both hands through his hair. Graham held the paper up to the light. It was a printed screenshot of an iMessage conversation. At the top, it showed Ethan's first and last name, and his actual phone number. The message was timestamped at 2:14 a.m. on January 1st, 3 years ago. It read, "Coralie, please don't say anything to her. I couldn't stop myself. Sienna is everything. I just need time to get out of the lease." She spoofed it, Ethan choked out, staring at the paper. "Graham, I swear to God I have never texted Coralie in my life. I don't even have her number saved in my phone." "I know," Graham said calmly. He didn't look worried. He looked annoyed, like someone had handed him a math problem with a glaringly obvious error. People think printing a screenshot is bulletproof evidence. It's actually the easiest thing in the world to fake with a third-party app, but we need to prove you weren't there. I looked at Ethan. "Bend," I said. "You were in Bend with your parents." Ethan's hands were shaking so badly he dropped his phone on the linoleum floor before he could unlock it. He snatched it up, opening his Google Maps timeline. He scrolled back 3 years. It took him him 2 frantic minutes of swiping, but he found it. His location data showed him leaving our apartment in Seattle at 8:00 a.m. on December 31st and arriving at his parents' address in Bend, Oregon at 2:30 p.m. He didn't leave their property until January 2nd. He opened his camera roll and found a selfie he had taken with his mom on the couch, watching the ball drop on TV. The digital metadata stamped the photo at 11:58 p.m. He was 300 miles away from the party where he supposedly kissed Sienna. Send that to my email right now, Graham instructed. I looked back through the narrow glass window of the courtroom door. Sienna and Coralie were sitting at the respondent's table, whispering to each other. It made me physically sick. Coralie and I had fallen out a year ago over a completely mundane, stupid argument about a shared Airbnb bill she refused to pay her portion of. It had been petty, but I had drawn a boundary and stopped talking to her. Sienna knew exactly how much that had bruised Coralie's ego, and she had weaponized it. She had found the one person who disliked me enough to commit perjury just to see me get taken down a peg. When we walked back into the courtroom, Graham didn't even sit down. He waited for the judge to settle, then turned his attention directly to Coralie, who was still sitting in the witness box. Miss Ravenswood, Graham started, his voice deceptively mild. You testified that you witnessed my client Ethan forcefully kissing Sienna in the guest bedroom of the Seattle apartment on New Year's Eve. Yes, Coralie said, lifting her chin. I did. And you received this text message from his phone number the following morning? Yes. Graham nodded slowly. He pulled out a printed packet of his own, the location data and the photograph Ethan had just emailed him, which Graham had his paralegal print at the courthouse business center during the recess. He handed copies to the bailiff, who handed them to the judge and to Sienna. That's fascinating, Graham said, pacing a few steps, because my client's device location history, corroborated by his cell tower pings and digital photograph metadata, places him at his mother's residence in Bend, Oregon, for the entirety of that weekend, a 6-hour drive from the party you claim he was at. Coralie's confident posture shattered instantly. She swallowed hard, her eyes darting from Graham to the judge, and then, desperately, over to Sienna. I might have the year wrong, Coralie stammered. It might have been the year before. The year before, my client and the petitioner had not even met yet. Graham countered smoothly. Do you have the original digital file of this screenshot on your mobile device, Miss Ravenswood, so we can have an independent forensic expert examine the metadata? Coralie gripped the edge of the wooden witness stand. No, I got a new phone. I only saved the printout. The judge took off his glasses and dropped them onto the desk. The sharp clack of the plastic hitting the wood echoed in the quiet room. He looked at Coralie with absolute disgust. Ms. Ravenswood, you are excused. If I ever see you in my courtroom again, I will have you held for perjury. Coralie scrambled out of the box and practically ran out the back doors of the courtroom without looking back. Sienna just sat there. The smug smile was gone, replaced by a rigid, terrifying blankness. She stared straight ahead at the judge's bench, her chest rising and falling in shallow, rapid breaths. The judge granted the civil injunction immediately. It was a strict 5-year protection order. Sienna was barred from coming within 500 feet of us, our residence, Ethan's workplace, or my clinic. Any violation would result in immediate arrest. Walking out of the courthouse into the gray Seattle afternoon, I felt a massive, crushing weight lift off my chest. I grabbed Ethan's hand, lacing my fingers through his. They were finally warm again. We thanked Graham on the sidewalk, watched him hail a cab, and walked toward the parking garage. I thought it was over. I thought the legal boundary would finally snap Sienna out of her delusion, or at least force her to retreat into the shadows. We got in the car. Ethan turned the key in the ignition, and his phone buzzed in the cup holder. Then, it buzzed again, and again. 3 rapid, sharp vibrations. He picked it up, glancing at the lock screen. I watched his face drain of blood for the second time that day. He didn't say a word. He just unlocked the phone, opened his email app, and handed the phone across the console to me. It was an email forwarded from Stellan, the chief technology officer at Ethan's software firm. Stellan was Ethan's direct boss, a no-nonsense guy who handled the firm's massive enterprise contracts. The original sender was Sienna. While we were sitting in the courtroom, right before the judge threw out Coralie's fake text, Sienna had hit send on a mass email. She hadn't just sent it to Stellan. She had CC'd the entire executive board, the HR director, and the general company mailing list. Hundreds of people. The subject line read, "The truth about Ethan's workplace conduct." I scrolled down. It was a 4-page, deeply deranged manifesto. Sienna detailed a completely fabricated, highly explicit 2-year affair. But she didn't just frame it as a romance anymore. Realizing she was losing her grip, she had shifted the narrative. She claimed Ethan had been using his senior architect position to access her personal data, tracking her location through company software, and threatening to leak compromised photos of her if she didn't comply with his demands. She attached the fake text message from Coralie. She attached the creepy photo of him sleeping. And worse, she attached heavily edited, out-of-context voice memos, recordings she must have taken secretly during group dinners, spliced together to sound like Ethan was yelling at her. Stellan's forwarded message at the top was just one line: "Ethan, HR needs you in conference room B at 8:00 a.m. tomorrow. Bring representation if you feel it's necessary." The engine of the Subaru was still running, the exhaust plumed in the cold concrete garage, curling up around the rearview mirror. I read Stellan's single line of text again. Then I read Sienna's manifesto. My hands actually went numb. She hadn't just accused him of an affair. She had constructed a narrative where Ethan was a predator using company resources to stalk her. In the post-Me Too corporate climate, an accusation like that wasn't just a red flag. It was a nuclear bomb. Ethan opened his car door and threw up right there on the concrete, next to the front tire. He coughed, spitting onto the ground, his shoulders heaving under his winter coat. I didn't try to comfort him. There was nothing comforting to say. I just reached over, put the car in park, and dialed Graham's number. Graham answered on the second ring. I put him on speakerphone. I read the email aloud. For the first time since we hired him, Graham swore. Just a short, sharp exhale of a curse word. Okay, he said, his voice dropping into a strictly professional cadence. This is retaliation for the injunction. She had this drafted and ready to go in case she lost today. She's trying to burn his life down before the ink on the protection order dries. Ethan wiped his mouth with the back of his hand and pulled the door shut. They want me in HR at 8 tomorrow. Do I go? Do I quit? He didn't sound like himself. You do not quit, Graham said firmly. Quitting looks like an admission of guilt. You go to the meeting. You do not get defensive. You do not get angry. You walk in there, and you slide a certified copy of the 5-year civil injunction across the table. You tell them you are the victim of a documented, legally recognized stalker who is currently under a court order to stay away from you. You explain that this email is an act of retaliation. Do not over-explain. Do not get dragged into defending the fake evidence. What about the voice memos? Ethan asked, his voice cracking. Graham, she sent audio. I haven't even listened to it yet. I don't know what she made me say. It doesn't matter what she manufactured, Graham replied. Corporate HR's primary function is to protect the company from liability. They are going to suspend you. Prepare yourself for that right now. It will be paid administrative leave pending an internal investigation. It is standard operating procedure. Hand over your badge, hand over your laptop, and walk out with your head held high. We didn't sleep that night either. We sat at the kitchen island, staring at the injunction papers. Ethan finally clicked on the audio files Sienna had attached to the mass email. It was chilling. It was Ethan's voice. Absolutely. But it was choppy. The background noise cutting in and out. You aren't going anywhere. I know exactly where you are. If you try to leave, I swear to God. Ethan buried his face in his hands. Board game night, he whispered. Last October. We were playing Betrayal at House on the Hill. I was the monster. She was recording me. At 7:00 a.m., I drove Ethan to his office building in South Lake Union. I parked at a meter down the block and watched him walk through the glass revolving doors, his shoulders tense. I went into a coffee shop across the street, ordered a black tea I didn't drink, and stared at my phone. He was in there for exactly 42 minutes. When he walked out, he didn't have his laptop bag. He got into the passenger seat and just stared straight ahead at the windshield. They brought in Blythe from corporate, he said, his voice hollow. Blythe was the regional HR director. She only flew up from San Francisco when someone was getting fired. Stellan couldn't even look at me. Blythe did all the talking. She said they have a zero-tolerance policy for workplace harassment and misuse of company software. Did you show them the injunction? I did, Ethan said. Blythe made a photocopy. But she said an injunction doesn't disprove the audio recordings, and until they can hire a third-party digital forensics firm to verify the files were spliced, I am a liability. I'm on indefinite leave. They revoked my building access. They wiped my company phone remotely while I was sitting at the table. Stellan told me not to contact anyone on my team. His hands were trembling in his lap. The tech summit in Austin was supposed to be his stepping stone to a director role. He had been preparing his presentation for 6 months. Now, he wasn't even allowed to log into his own email. I put the car in drive and pulled away from the curb. We are going to fight this, I said, though my own voice sounded thin and unconvincing. Graham will get the forensics done. We have Coralie on record committing perjury. It's just a matter of time. I dropped Ethan off at home, making sure all the deadbolts were locked and the ring cameras were active. I had to get to my shift at the clinic. I'm a physical therapist, and my schedule was booked solid from 10 until 6. I needed the routine. I needed to put my hands on someone's shoulder, tell them to stretch, and pretend the world made sense for a few hours. I walked into the clinic break room at 9:45 am to put my lunch in the fridge. My boss, Caden, was standing by the coffee machine. He's usually a relaxed, easygoing guy who wears quarter zips and talks about his golden retriever. Today, he looked incredibly tense. Can I see you in my office? He asked, not making eye contact. My stomach gave a violent, sickening lurch. I followed him down the narrow hallway. He shut the door behind us and gestured for me to sit down. He didn't sit. He stood behind his desk, leaning on his knuckles. I got a call this morning, Caden started, choosing his words with agonizing care, from the state medical board. An anonymous complaint was filed against your license. The room tilted. What? The complaint alleges that you have been improperly accessing patient databases to look up the home addresses of your ex-boyfriend's new partner, Caden said, reading off a notepad on his desk. It also alleges you've been stealing sample medications from the supply closet. Caden, that is insane, I said, jumping to my feet. I don't have an ex-boyfriend. I'm engaged. I don't even have the key to the medication closet. You're the only one who does. I know, Caden said, holding up a hand to stop me. I know you don't. But the board doesn't know that. They received a detailed sworn affidavit, and because it involves HIPAA violations and theft of controlled substances, they are legally obligated to investigate. Sienna, she had realized that taking Ethan down wasn't enough to break us. She was coming for my livelihood now. She knew exactly which buttons to push to trigger an automatic administrative nightmare. It's my former best friend, I said, my voice shaking with rage. We just got a 5-year restraining order against her yesterday. She's stalking Ethan. She's delusional. This is retaliation. Caden sighed, rubbing his temples. I believe you. Truly, I do. You've been my best therapist here for 4 years. But my hands are tied. Until the state board clears you, our corporate insurance won't let you treat patients. I have to pull you off the floor. For how long? I demanded. Investigations usually take 4 to 6 weeks, Caden said quietly. I'm sorry. It's unpaid. I can't authorize payroll for a suspended license. I walked out of the clinic at 10:15 am. The sky was the color of wet concrete. Within 24 hours of winning in court, we had both lost our jobs. Ethan was on paid leave, but my suspension was unpaid. Our mortgage was $3,400 a month. Graham's retainer was already drained, and we owed him another $2,000 for the emergency consultation this morning. I got into my car and just sat there, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. My phone buzzed in my pocket pocket. It was an unknown number. I normally wouldn't answer, but my brain was completely fried. I hit accept and put it to my ear. Hello? She isn't going to stop, you know. The voice was quiet, hesitant. It took my brain a full 3 seconds to place it. Coralie? I breathed, my grip tightening on the phone. Don't hang up, Coralie said quickly. The background noise sounded like she was walking outside, wind whipping against the microphone. I left Portland. I'm driving back right now. I need to tell you what she has. She didn't just fake that text message. She's been in your house. I stopped breathing. The wind over the phone line hissed, crackling against the speaker. I looked out the windshield of my Subaru, at the gray, rain-slicked asphalt of the clinic parking lot, and felt a cold sweat break out across my neck. What are you talking about? I asked. My voice didn't even sound like mine. It was a raspy whisper. The photo at the gallery, Coralie said, her words spilling out fast, tripping over each other. The one she hung on the wall. She didn't take it from outside through the window. She took it from your hallway. She told me. She bragged about it. How? I demanded, gripping the steering wheel so hard my wrist popped. We have cameras. We have deadbolts. She house sat for you, Coralie said. Last August, when you and Ethan went to Vancouver for that long weekend. You gave her the spare key to water your plants. She went to a hardware store on 4th Avenue and made a copy. She's had a key to your house for a year. She said she's gone inside at least a dozen times while you were both at work. And twice while you were sleeping. A wave of pure physical nausea hit me so hard I had to open the car door and lean out, gagging dryly onto the pavement. My own house, my sanctuary, the place where I slept, where I showered, where I walked around in the dark to get a glass of water. Sienna had been standing there, watching us. Why are you telling me this now? I gasped, wiping my mouth. You just tried to destroy my fiancé in court 4 hours ago, because she promised me it would just be the text message. Coralie's voice cracked, sounding genuinely frantic. She told me if I just corroborated the kiss, you guys would break up and it would be over. She gave me $5,000. I have student loans and I was angry at you about the Airbnb thing. And she made it sound like a victimless crime. She said Ethan actually did like her, but when the judge threw it out, she looked at me in the hallway. She looked dead behind the eyes. She told me I was useless to her now, and if I ever crossed her, she would ruin my residency. I realized she's entirely unhinged. I got in my car and drove straight to I-5. I'm an hour south of Seattle. I'm going back to Portland, and I'm changing my number. Change your locks today. Please. She hung up. The line went dead. I sat in the cold car for a long time. The dashboard clock blinked 10:28 a.m. By noon, I realized the full scope of our reality. Sienna had systematically dismantled our income, our reputations, and our physical safety, all within a 72-hour window. I drove home like a maniac, breaking the speed limit down I-5, my heart hammering against my ribs. When I pulled into the driveway, I practically fell out of the car. I fumbled with my keys, dropped them on the porch, picked them up, and jammed them into the deadbolt. Ethan was sitting at the kitchen table with a legal pad, staring blankly at a column of numbers. He looked up when I burst in, his eyes red-rimmed. We need a locksmith, I said, locking the door behind me and throwing the deadbolt. Right now. We need to change every lock on the doors and the windows. He stood up, alarmed by the sheer panic on my face. What happened? Did HR call you? No. Caden suspended me. The medical board got an anonymous complaint. I can't work. I walked over to the kitchen island, checking the locks on the back patio doors. But that's not the worst part. Coralie just called me. Sienna kept a copy of our house key from last summer. She's been coming inside. Ethan froze. The color completely drained from his face for the 3rd time in 2 days. He looked slowly around the kitchen, his eyes darting to the hallway, the living room, the stairs leading up to our bedroom. It was the look of a man realizing the walls around him were made of paper. The gallery photo, he whispered, putting the pieces together instantly. His analytical brain didn't need me to spell it out. The angle. It was taken from the bottom of the stairs, not the window. We need to check everything, I said. Every drawer, every closet. We called a 24-hour emergency locksmith. He charged us $400 for the rush call. While he was drilling out the old brass deadbolts on the front and back doors, Ethan and I tore the house apart. It felt like a violation, just looking for a violation. We went through my underwear drawer, the medicine cabinet, the lockbox in the closet where we kept our passports. At first, everything seemed untouched. The passports were there, my jewelry was there. It didn't make sense. If she was coming in, why not take something of value? Then I opened the bottom drawer of Ethan's nightstand. It was where he kept old mementos, ticket stubs from concerts we went to, a dried corsage from a wedding, his grandfather's old silver cufflinks. The small wooden cigar box where he kept the cufflinks was sitting exactly where it always did, but when I opened it, it was empty. Ethan, I called out, my voice shaking. He walked into the bedroom. I held up the empty cigar box. The antique pocket watch, I said, my blood running cold. The one she left on the kitchen island. The one she said you gave her. Ethan stared at the box. That was my grandfather's watch. I kept it under the cufflinks. I haven't opened that box in a year. She hadn't just bought a random watch to stage a delusion. She had stolen a deeply personal family heirloom from his bedside table while we were out of the house, and then left it on our kitchen counter to fabricate a proposal. She was writing a script and using our own lives as the props. The locksmith finished at 2 p.m. We handed over a credit card, adding to the mounting pile of debt this week was generating. When the door clicked shut behind him, the house was completely silent. It didn't feel safe. It felt like a trap we had just locked ourselves inside of. We sat down at the kitchen table. The legal pad Ethan had been working on was filled with our monthly expenses. Mortgage, utilities, groceries, car insurance, internet, and now, Graham's legal fees. I mapped it out, Ethan said quietly, sliding the pad toward me. His handwriting, usually precise and neat, was jagged. With both of us on unpaid or administrative leave, we have enough in liquid savings to cover the mortgage and Graham's current invoices for exactly 2 months. After that, we have to dip into the 401ks. And if they fire me, The penalty for early withdrawal will gut it. 2 months. We had spent 6 years building a life together, working 60-hour weeks, saving for a wedding, and Sienna had put an expiration date of 60 days on our entire existence. I'll sell my car, I said immediately. We can share yours. My Subaru is paid off. I can get maybe 12 grand for it. Ethan shook his head. No, you need your car to get to interviews if the clinic doesn't bring you back. I'll sell the camera gear. Ethan, no, I said, reaching across the table to grab his hand. That's your passion. You've spent years building that kit. It's just glass and metal, he said, his voice completely flat. The gallery is ruined anyway. Jasper won't return my calls. I'm blacklisted in the local indie art scene now because of the scene she caused. I can get $8,000 for the 2 Sony bodies and the master lenses on eBay by the end of the week. We need the cash for Graham. We have to pay the digital forensics firm to clear my name at work. He stood up, walked into his small home office, and started pulling his expensive lenses out of their padded Pelican cases. Watching him photograph his own gear to list online broke something inside me. It was a tangible surrender. Sienna was physically stripping away the things that brought him joy. The next morning, the paranoia set in permanently. I woke up at 5 a.m., my heart racing, convinced I had heard a floorboard creak in the hallway. I lay stiff in bed for 20 minutes before I finally got up, grabbed a heavy flashlight from the nightstand, and cleared my own house like I was a security guard. Nothing was there, just the quiet hum of the refrigerator. At 9 a.m., Ethan's phone rang. It wasn't his company phone that had been wiped and deactivated. It was his personal cell. The caller ID flashed Lou's mom. Ethan let out a long breath and answered. Hey, Mom. I watched his face as he listened. He had put it on speakerphone, resting it on the kitchen island while he poured coffee. Ethan, sweetie, Lou's voice came through, sounding strained and incredibly confused. Did you and the wedding get called off? I'm so confused, honey. Ethan gripped the edge of the counter. What? No, Mom, no, we're fine. Why would you ask that? I received a package in the mail this morning, Luz said. I could hear paper rustling in the background. It was sent overnight via FedEx. There was a letter inside and a gift. It's a framed photograph of you sleeping on a couch. My stomach plummeted into my shoes. Mom, listen to me very carefully, Ethan said, his voice dropping into a stern, commanding tone I rarely heard him use. Who is the letter from? It's signed by Sienna, Luz said softly. Ethan, it's 4 pages long. She says you've been having a secret affair with her for 2 years, and that you're too scared of your fiancé's temper to leave the relationship. She says you begged her to reach out to me for help. She included a key to your house. She said you wanted me to have it so I could come rescue you. Sienna had mailed the spare key she kept to his mother in Oregon. She was expanding the blast radius. Mom, throw it away, Ethan said, his voice shaking with suppressed rage. Do not read another word. She is stalking us. We just got a 5-year restraining order against her yesterday. She is deeply mentally ill, and she is trying to destroy our lives because I rejected her. She got me suspended from work. She got my fiancé suspended from the clinic. Do you understand me? She is dangerous. There was a long silence on the line. Then, Luz spoke, her voice trembling slightly. She included an itinerary. Ethan, a flight confirmation. She booked a ticket to Redmond Airport for next Thursday. She wrote that you asked her to come stay in my guest room until the dust settles in Seattle. Sienna wasn't just sending letters. She was trying to physically insert herself into his family home under the guise of a rescue mission. I'm calling the police in Bend, Ethan said immediately. Mom, lock your doors. If she shows up, you do not open the door. You call 911. We hung up and immediately dialed Graham. He answered on the first ring, sounding exhausted. She mailed a package to my mother in Oregon, Ethan said, not even bothering with a greeting. She included a key to my house and a flight itinerary claiming she's coming to stay with her next week. Okay, Graham said, the rustle of a legal pad in the background. This is an escalation, but it's also a mistake on her part. She crossed state lines with the harassment. That elevates this from a local King County civil issue to potential federal jurisdiction regarding interstate stalking. Plus, she sent a key to a house she does not own, through the mail, in furtherance of a harassment campaign. So what do we do? I asked, leaning over the phone. We file a police report right now for the stolen key and the stolen pocket watch, Graham instructed. You didn't know they were stolen until Coralie told you about the break-ins. Now you do. You file a report for burglary. The civil injunction is a shield, but a burglary charge is a sword. We need to force the King County prosecutor to actually look at her. We spent the next 4 hours at the North Precinct, sitting in hard plastic chairs in a depressing, fluorescent lit waiting area. We finally spoke to a detective named Trask. He was a tired-looking guy in his 40s with a spilled coffee stain on his tie. He took notes on a small spiral pad while we laid out the entire timeline. The trivia night, the pocket watch, the gallery incident, the fake text, the mass email to Ethan's company, my clinic suspension, and now the package sent to Oregon. Trask stopped writing and looked at us. Do you have proof she took the key and the watch? Video footage of her inside the house? No, Ethan admitted, frustrated. But she mailed the physical key to my mother. The postmark will prove she sent it. It proves she had a key, Trask corrected gently. It doesn't prove she stole it. She could claim you gave it to her. And the watch? She left it on your counter. That's bizarre. Yes, but proving she entered your home unlawfully to take it, without video or a confession, is entirely circumstantial, especially since she claims you two are having an affair. Coralie will testify, I said desperately. Our friend. Sienna confessed to her that she went inside. A friend who just committed perjury in a family court hearing yesterday? Trask raised an eyebrow. A defense attorney would tear her credibility to shreds in 5 minutes. Look, I'm not saying I don't believe you. I do. This woman sounds like a nightmare. You did the right thing getting the protection order. But criminal burglary? Based on what you've given me, the prosecutor won't touch it. It's a he said she said tangled up in a civil dispute. She is trying to destroy our lives, Ethan said, his voice rising. screaming, echoing in the squad room. She cost us our jobs. She's harassing my mother across state lines. The interstate harassment is your best angle, Trask said, handing Ethan a business card. I'll forward the report to the cybercrimes unit regarding the spoof texts and the mass email to your employer. But I'll be honest with you. Unless she physically breaches the distance of that protection order or makes a direct, actionable threat of violence, she is dancing right on the edge of the law. These types of stalkers, they know exactly where the line is. We walked out of the precinct feeling more defeated than when we walked in. The law wasn't a brick wall protecting us. It was a chain link fence, and Sienna was just slipping her fingers through the gaps. By Friday, the financial reality began to bite hard. Ethan's camera gear sold to a buyer in Chicago. He packed the lenses into a cardboard box with bubble wrap, taped it shut with aggressive force, and drove it to the Up Store. $8,000 dropped into our checking account. It felt like blood money. We immediately wired $3,000 of it to the digital forensics firm Graham recommended, just to start the analysis on the audio files Sienna had sent to HR. I spent my days sitting at the kitchen table, furiously refreshing my email, waiting for a response from the state medical board regarding my license. Nothing came. Bureaucracy moves at a glacial pace, entirely indifferent to the fact that my career was bleeding out. On Saturday morning, I was in the kitchen brewing coffee. Ethan was upstairs in the shower. The house was quiet, too quiet. The doorbell rang. I jumped, sloshing boiling water over the rim of my mug onto my hand. I hissed in pain, grabbing a paper towel, and walked slowly toward the front door. I didn't open it. I checked the Ring camera feed on my phone. Standing on our front porch was a woman I had never seen before. She looked to be in her late 60s, wearing a conservative beige trench coat and carrying a thick leather binder. She pressed the doorbell again. I cracked the door, leaving the heavy brass chain engaged. "Can I help you?" I asked, my voice tight. The woman offered a polite, deeply sympathetic smile. "Are you the homeowner?" "Yes. Who are you?" "My name is Vesper Quill," she said, handing a card through the narrow gap in the door. "I'm a real estate agent with Windermere. I'm here for the 10 LOAM walkthrough." I stared at the card, then up at her face. "Walkthrough? What walkthrough? We aren't selling our house." Vesper looked genuinely confused. She opened her leather binder, pulling out a printed sheet of paper. "I received an inquiry through our portal last night from a woman stating she was the co-owner of this property. She said you and your fiancé were separating due to irreconcilable differences and needed to list the property for a short sale immediately. She scheduled an urgent appraisal for this morning." A cold, sharp spike of anger drove itself straight through my chest. "What name was on the inquiry?" I demanded. "Sienna Ravenswood," Vesper read from the paper. "She listed herself as the primary contact. She was trying to sell our house out from under us. She couldn't legally do it, of course. Her name wasn't on the deed, but she was deploying professionals to harass us in our own home, forcing us to constantly explain, constantly defend our reality to strangers. There is no sale," I said to Vesper, my voice shaking with fury. "That woman is a stalker. We have a restraining order against her. Please delete this address from your system and do not come back." I slammed the door and locked it. I leaned against the heavy wood, sliding down until I was sitting on the floor in the entryway, pulling my knees to my chest. Sienna wasn't just reconstructing reality in her own mind anymore. She was actively overwriting ours. She had taken Ethan's job. She had taken my license. She had invaded our home, stolen our memories, and alienated our friends. Now she was sending real estate agents to appraise the ruins. I heard the shower shut off upstairs. A few minutes later, Ethan walked down the stairs, drying his hair with a towel. He saw me sitting on the floor by the door and stopped. "Who was it?" he asked, his voice hollow. "A realtor," I said, staring at the baseboards. "Sienna scheduled a walkthrough to short sell the house." Ethan didn't yell. He didn't punch the wall. He just dropped the towel on the stairs and sat down on the bottom step, burying his face in his hands. We sat there in silence for a long time, 10 feet apart, in a house that didn't feel like ours anymore. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out. It was a text message. Not from an unknown number. It was from Jasper, the owner of the indie art gallery where Sienna had smashed the glass and hung the creepy photo. I hadn't spoken to him since the night of the showcase. The message read, "I need you and Ethan to come down to the gallery. Right now. Use the back alley entrance." I didn't reply. I just turned the phone around and held it up so Ethan could read the screen. He stood up from the bottom step, leaving his towel on the stairs, and grabbed his keys off the console table. We didn't speak on the drive downtown. It was raining again, a fine mist that smeared the windshield faster than the wipers could clear it. We pulled into the narrow, brick-lined alley behind the gallery. The heavy steel service door was propped open a crack. Jasper was standing just inside, holding a cup of coffee, looking like he hadn't slept in a week. He ushered us in and locked the deadbolt behind us. The gallery was dark, the track lighting shut off. We stood in the small back office, surrounded by bubble-wrapped canvases and stacked folding chairs. Sitting dead center on his cluttered desk was the canvas tote bag, the one Sienna had slung over her shoulder when she marched in wearing the wedding dress. When Arlo dragged her out that night, she dropped it, Jasper said quietly, rubbing his jaw. In the chaos with the broken glass and the shouting, I just kicked it behind the reception desk. I meant to give it to the police, but honestly, I completely forgot it was there. My cleaning crew found it this morning and put it on my desk. Jasper took a step back. I opened it to look for an ID. "I thought I should call you." Ethan stepped forward. He reached into the bag and pulled out a thick, black and white marbled composition notebook. Underneath it was a cheap, digital voice recorder, the kind college students use to record lectures. Ethan opened the notebook. I stood shoulder to shoulder with him, looking down at the pages. It wasn't a diary. It was a ledger. Sienna had meticulously documented everything, in neat, bulleted lists. She hadn't done it because she was a criminal mastermind. She had done it because she genuinely believed she was chronicling a grand, tragic love story. She wanted a record of her sacrifices. August 12, got the key copied on 4th Ave, $4.50. $4. He'll be so happy when I can finally just let myself in. October 22, recorded his voice voice during betrayal at House on the Hill, splicing it on the laptop tonight. I have to make it sound like he's trapped, so people understand why we have to run away. November 5, took Grandpa Locke's watch from the nightstand. I'll give it back to him as a symbol of our new timeline. She had written down the passwords she guessed, the dates she sat outside our house, the script she used when she called Delta Airlines. She even had a rough draft of the email she sent to Ethan's HR department, complete with crossed-out sentences where she decided to sound more afraid. It was a complete, handwritten confession to burglary, identity theft, wire fraud, and interstate harassment. Ethan picked up the digital recorder and hit the play button. A harsh static hiss filled the small office, followed by a woman's voice dropping into an artificially deep register. Yes, this is Ethan Locke's executive assistant calling regarding his flight to Austin. She had practiced the voice-altering software and recorded her own rehearsal. I felt my knees go weak. I pulled out one of the folding chairs and sat down hard. It was over. She had left the smoking gun in a canvas bag in downtown Seattle. We didn't go home. We drove straight back to the North Precinct and asked for Detective Trask. We sat in the fluorescent-lit lobby for an hour before he finally came down. When we laid the notebook and the voice recorder on his metal desk, his expression shifted from tired indifference to sharp, absolute focus. "This is it," Trask said, carefully slipping the notebook into an evidence bag. "The key copy, the HR email drafts, the recording. It proves the break-ins. It proves the extortion. I'm putting in a warrant for her arrest." The next 48 hours moved with blinding speed. Graham took high-resolution scans of the notebook's HR draft pages, along with a statement from Trask, and fired them off to Blythe at Ethan's corporate headquarters. Confronted with a literal police investigation into a fabricated claim, corporate HR completely folded. Blythe called Ethan on Tuesday morning. He was fully reinstated, with back pay, and a formal apology from Stellan, who admitted he had panicked. I drove to the clinic on Wednesday with a copy of the police report. Caden read it in his office, his face pale. He immediately called the state medical board. Because the anonymous complaint was now officially linked to a criminal suspect facing felony charges, the board issued an emergency dismissal. I was back on the schedule by noon. On Thursday morning, the day Sienna was supposed to fly to Oregon to ambush Ethan's mother, we woke up at 6 a.m. We didn't check the ring cameras. We didn't clear the hallway with a flashlight. We just walked downstairs and made coffee. The house was quiet. The new locks felt heavy and secure. At 8:15 a.m., Ethan's phone rang. It was Trask. Ethan put it on speaker so we could both hear. "Just wanted to give you the courtesy call," Trask said, the sound of police radios buzzing faintly in the background. "Saw flagged her at the security checkpoint at SeaTac an hour ago. She was trying to board the flight to Redmond. Port of Seattle police took her into custody without incident. Did she say anything?" I asked, my hands wrapped tightly around my coffee mug. Trask sighed. "She told the arresting officers they were making a mistake. She told them her fiancé was waiting for her at the gate." "Thank you, detective," Ethan said. His voice was steady, completely calm. He hung up the phone and set it face down on the granite island. He looked at me, the tension finally gone from his jaw, the dark circles under his eyes seeming a little less hollow. He reached across the counter and took my hand. His skin was warm. We stood there in the quiet kitchen, listening to the rain hit the windows, and drank our coffee.